He was just a teenage boy buying his sister a birthday gift. But a white cop slammed him to the ground outside the mall, called him a thief, pressed his knee on his back, and humiliated him in front of everyone. No one stepped in. No one helped. Until 10 black SUVs pulled up, and 10 FBI agents surrounded the scene. Turns out the boy's father wasn't who they thought he was. How far can injustice go before the truth strikes back? If this story shook you, hit like and share now. Let's witness what really happened that day. It was one of those quiet Sunday mornings when the world felt harmless. The kind of morning where nothing bad should happen. 16-year-old Jaden Carter walked into the kitchen, still half asleep, his backpack slung over one shoulder. His mother smiled, pouring coffee. His sister Sophie grinned, teasing. "So, Mr. Stanford, what are you getting me for my birthday?" He smirked. "Something special. You'll find out soon." From the end of the table, Malcolm Carter folded his newspaper, eyes calm but sharp. "Be careful out there, son. And remember who you are." Jaden didn't ask what that meant. He just nodded because when his dad said something like that, it always carried a weight he couldn't explain. The Brookdale Mall was alive with light and laughter. Children tugged at their parents' hands, teenagers posed for selfies near the fountain, and holiday music echoed through the wide hallways. Jaden moved among them quietly, the kind of kid who didn't draw attention, polite, well-dressed headphones, and just another student running weekend errands. Inside Ward & Co., the boutique smelled of new fabric and clean air conditioning. A friendly young woman behind the counter, Emily Ward, greeted him with a smile. "Looking for something special?" "Yeah," Jaden said, lifting a blue hoodie from the rack. "It's for my little sister's birthday. She loves this color." Emily nodded. "Good choice. That shade sold out last week. You got lucky." Jaden chuckled. "Guess I did." He paid with his debit card, watched the receipt print, and tucked it into the bag. "Tell her happy birthday for me," Emily said as he left. He smiled back. "I will." For a moment, life was good, simple, ordinary. He texted his mom a photo of the gift. "She's gonna love this." Her reply came almost instantly. "Drive safe, baby." Then another text popped up from his dad. "On my way, son. Be safe out there." Jaden smiled. He had no idea how those words were about to echo in his mind. 3 stores down, the sound of a security alarm split the calm like a blade. Beep, beep, beep. A man in a red hoodie sprinted out of TechZone Electronics, clutching something under his arm. "Stop him," a clerk shouted, but the thief vanished into the maze of shoppers. Security guard Rick Morales stepped from his booth, scanning the hall. "Which way east exit?" someone yelled. Morales' gaze swept the corridor. He saw mothers, couples, kids, and near the exit, a tall black teenager in a dark hoodie with a backpack. Jaden. That was all it took. Morales pressed his radio. "Possible suspect, black male, dark hoodie, backpack, heading east exit." Static crackled back. "Copy that." Officers responding. 3 blocks away, Officer Dean Miller sat in his patrol car, half distracted by his phone. Then the call came in. "Suspect fleeing east exit. Black male, dark hoodie, backpack." Dean straightened, a grin creeping across his face. "Got him." Moving in. He tossed his coffee, hit the siren, and the cruiser lunged forward. As he sped toward the mall, his hand brushed the grip of his gun, a reflex more than a thought. Meanwhile, Jaden walked toward the exit, earbuds in his shopping bag, swinging casually. He stopped near the glass doors, texting his mom again. Heading home now. He didn't see the cruiser skidding into the parking lot outside. Didn't see the officer slam his door hand on his weapon. He only heard the voice, loud, raw, violent. "Hey, you, stop." Right there, the words hit like a gunshot. Jaden froze. People turned their heads. The mall's cheerful music suddenly felt wrong, too bright, too loud. He turned slowly, confusion etched across his face. Me, the officer, was already marching toward him, hands still near his gun. "Yeah, you hands, where I can see him." Jaden raised his hands bag dangling from his wrist. "Sir, I didn't." "Don't move," Dean barked, his voice echoing off the glass. The mall fell into silence. Even the children stopped talking. Jaden's heart pounded in his ears. "I just bought this," he said quietly, voice shaking. "I have the receipt." Dean didn't care. He closed the distance fast, stepping into Jaden's space, eyes burning with suspicion. "You match the description." "On your knees, sir, please," I said now. Dean grabbed Jaden's arm, twisting hard. The shopping bag hit the ground, the blue hoodie spilling out across the concrete. The receipt fluttered away in the breeze. Someone gasped. Phones came out. Cameras started recording. Emily, from inside the store, pressed her hands against the glass, her face pale. "Sir, you're hurting me," Jaden cried out. Dean shoved him harder against the wall. Stop resisting, I'm not. The sound of Jaden's voice cracked through the air, fear mixed with disbelief. He'd done everything right, but it didn't matter. Not his politeness, not his grades, not even the receipt. A man in the crowd muttered, "What the hell is he doing to that kid?" Dean shot him a glare. "Back off." Police business, nobody moved. Nobody helped. Then Jaden's phone buzzed on the ground, his father's name glowing on the screen, Dad calling. Dean glanced down at it, then kicked it aside with his boot. And just like that, the last calm moment of Jaden Carter's life was gone. The moment Officer Dean Miller drew his gun, the air changed. The mall's chatter died. Every sound seemed to fold into silence. "Hands up! On your knees!" he shouted. The echo bounced off the glass walls, sharp and cold. Jaden froze. He didn't understand. His hands lifted slowly, trembling. "Sir, what did I do?" Dean's boots struck the concrete, one heavy step after another. "You heard me," he barked, grabbing Jaden by the collar and yanking him down hard. The teenager hit the ground face first. The shopping bag tore open beside him, the blue hoodie tumbling across the floor. Dean's knee dropped onto his back, fast, heavy, unforgiving. Jaden gasped. "Please, I can't breathe." But Dean didn't move. His weight pressed harder, like he was trying to pin down the entire world. A few feet away, a little boy whispered to his mother, "Mom, he's just a kid." The woman pulled him close, eyes wide with fear. "Don't look, baby." Jaden tried to speak, his voice breaking. "I just bought this. I have the receipt," Dean spat beside him. "Receipts can be printed. Lying's in your blood." A few people gasped. Others lifted their phones, filming. One man muttered, "What the hell's wrong with him?" Dean ignored everyone. He tore Jaden's backpack off and dumped it out. Textbooks hit the ground, a calculus book, a folder marked Stanford application papers fluttering in the breeze. Something white caught the light. A letter. The Stanford acceptance letter. Dean picked it up, sneered, then dropped it to the ground. He stepped on it slowly, deliberately grinding the heel of his boot across the university seal. "Stanford," he mocked. "You steal that too?" Jaden's jaw tightened. His cheek pressed against the pavement, warm blood sliding down from a scrape near his temple. "I earned that," he said weakly. Dean leaned down close enough for Jaden to smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Sure you did," he whispered, and pushed his knee harder into the boy's back. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Hey, he's just a kid." Dean raised his head and snapped back off police procedure. His voice cracked like a whip and people hesitated. They stayed back. They always stayed back. Phones kept recording. Dozens now. Some live-streamed captions flashing across screens. Another black teen pinned down. No weapon, no reason. Number, justice for Jaden. Jaden's body trembled. He could barely lift his head. "I'm not resisting." Dean grabbed his wrists, forcing them behind his back with a twist that made him cry out. "Every thief says he's innocent." The metal cuffs snapped shut. They bit into his skin. Dean rose, dragging him up by the arm like he weighed nothing. The blood from Jaden's cheek smeared onto Dean's glove. At the edge of the crowd, Emily Ward, the clerk from the clothing store, pushed through breathless. "Stop, please," she shouted. "I sold him those clothes. He didn't steal anything." Dean barely looked at her. "Ma'am, step back." She raised her iPad. "I have proof, the transaction record, right here." Her hands shook as she held it up. Jaden's name, debit card number, and timestamp were all on the screen, clear as day. But Dean didn't even glance at it. He shoved her aside with one hand. "Interfering with an arrest is a charge, ma'am. Step back or I'll make it two." Emily froze. Fear flickered across her face, but so did anger. She stood there, voice trembling, but loud enough for the crowd to hear. "This is wrong. You're hurting him." Dean turned back to Jaden. "Let's see how wrong it feels in a cell." Jaden's phone buzzed on the ground, vibrating weakly near his face. The screen lit up. "Dad calling." He tried to twist his head, but Dean kicked the phone aside. It skidded under a car. The crowd gasped again. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Dean shoved Jaden forward, forcing him toward the patrol car parked by the curb. "You'll learn some respect today," he muttered. Jaden stumbled, still cuffed. "I didn't do anything," he said, voice cracking. "Please, just call my dad." Dean smirked. "You think your daddy can help you now?" The live stream count hit thousands. Comments poured in disbelief, fury, heartbreak. "Where's the proof? Why isn't anyone stopping this?" Another one. "Jesus." People yelled at Dean, but no one stepped between them. The fear was thick, not of the gun, but of the badge. Emily stayed near the curb, hands shaking, whispering to herself, "God, someone do something." But no one did. Not yet. Dean shoved Jaden's head down, forcing him into the backseat of the cruiser. The teenager's eyes met the reflection in the window, his own face streaked with sweat and blood. He looked older suddenly, smaller too. Inside the patrol car, the radio crackled. Unit 43 status. Dean pressed his shoulder mic. Suspect detained. Requesting backup for transport. The voice on the other end replied, "Copy that. Be advised, possible armed suspect." Dean smiled faintly. "Yeah, we'll see about that." As the door slammed shut behind Jaden, the phones kept rolling. The crowd's anger was boiling now, their words louder, sharper. "Hey, check his bag again. He's innocent. He's a kid." Dean ignored them all. He climbed into the driver's seat, his expression flat, detached, like this was just another day. The cruiser rolled forward. Behind them, a blue hoodie fluttered on the pavement, torn, dirty, and forgotten. But somewhere on a dozen live streams, the footage kept playing. People were watching. And somewhere miles away, a man in a government office saw his phone light up and froze when he saw the face on the screen. His son. The sound of shouting pulled more people from the stores. By the time Emily Ward ran out of her shop, the scene in the parking lot looked unreal, like a nightmare unfolding in daylight. She clutched her iPad tight against her chest and yelled, "Wait, I sold him those clothes. I have proof." Officer Dean Miller didn't even turn his head. "Step back, ma'am. You're interfering with police business." But Emily didn't move. Her voice trembled, but she raised the tablet higher. "Look, his name, the transaction, everything. I just sold him that hoodie 15 minutes ago." The younger officer beside Dean, Kevin Cho, shifted nervously. He wasn't much older than Jaden, maybe 23, fresh out of the academy, his badge still too shiny. "Sir," he said carefully, "maybe we should check." Dean cut him off, voice like a whip. "You want to lose your job, rookie. Stand down." Kevin froze. His hand dropped to his belt, his jaw tight. He looked at Jaden, the kid on the ground, struggling to breathe, a cuff digging into his wrist, and then back at Dean. He wanted to say something, but fear held his tongue. Emily felt her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She started recording. Her hands shook, but she kept the camera steady on Dean's knee, pressing down on Jaden's back. "Please," Jaden's voice came weak, cracked. "Please check the cameras inside." No one answered. No one even moved. Dean reached into Jaden's bag again, pulled out the crumpled receipt Emily had given him earlier, and tore it in half. The pieces floated to the ground. He smirked as if the act itself was proof enough of guilt. Emily's voice broke. "That's the receipt, you ma'am." Dean snapped. "I said, step back." He pointed at her now, his tone sharp enough to cut through her breath. She took one step back, then stopped. Her fear turned into something else, anger. She lifted her iPad again and whispered to herself, "Fine. The world will see." Around them, the crowd kept growing. A mother clutched her daughter's shoulder. A man in a construction vest crossed his arms, shaking his head. Someone whispered, "Why's nobody stopping him?" Another replied, "Because he's wearing a badge." Phones were everywhere, lifted high, cameras recording every second. Jaden lay motionless, the sound of his shallow breathing barely audible beneath the murmurs. A woman near the front gasped, "Look at his face, he's bleeding." Dean barked, "Stay back." Nobody moved forward, but nobody left either. Then came the sound, faint at first, then rising. Sirens. Not police, fire trucks somewhere in the distance. The wailing echoed between the buildings, mixing with the heavy breathing of the crowd and the metallic click of more phones unlocking. Emily's thumb hovered over the screen of her iPad. Her recording showed Jaden's face, pale and terrified, the officer's knee pinning him to the concrete. She hesitated for half a second, then hit share. Her caption was short, trembling as she typed it out. "This boy is innocent. Please share." The internet moved faster than air. Within minutes, notifications started pinging. Someone nearby whispered, "It's live already. It's on Twitter." Another voice, "I'm watching the stream right now." The crowd's murmurs turned to disbelief. A man shouted from the sidewalk, "This is police brutality again." People began shouting, phones held high, voices trembling with outrage. "What's your badge number? You can't do this. Where's your backup, huh?" Dean ignored them all. His face was blank, the kind of blank that comes from years of power without consequence. He leaned closer to Jaden's ear. "You move again, and I'll make you wish you hadn't." The words weren't loud enough for the crowd, but the nearest phone picked up every syllable. The recording captured his tone, his cruelty, and by then it was already streaming to hundreds, then thousands. Kevin Cho's stomach twisted. He could feel every eye on them. "Sir, this doesn't feel right," he whispered. Dean glared at him. "You want to take charge, rookie? Be my guest." Kevin's throat closed. "No, sir." So he stepped back, the safe choice, the coward's choice. And in that silence, the crowd's judgment grew heavier. Emily's post hit 3 platforms in under 5 minutes. Hundreds of comments flooded in. Is this real? Someone stop him. Where is this happening? A stranger from across town typed Brookdale Mall. And just like that, it had a location, a name, a headline waiting to be written. The camera focused once more on Jaden's face, his cheek pressed into the pavement, his eyes wide open, glassy with fear and humiliation. Dean's voice boomed one last time, suspect in custody. Then in slow motion, the sound faded out, replaced by the overlapping noise of notifications, shares, and the rising heartbeat of a nation about to watch. A single phone screen filled the frame. Emily's video replayed again and again, view count climbing. The caption below it glowed bright against the black background number, Justice for Jaden 1204 views, 23875912. It was spreading. And somewhere far away, a man's phone began to buzz. He didn't know yet that the face on the screen was his son. The video hit the internet like a spark in dry grass, spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. By the time it reached the federal building, downtown thousands were already watching. Anger, disbelief, and heartbreak filled the comments like a storm brewing in silence. Inside a glass-walled office on the 12th floor, Director Malcolm Carter sat behind his desk, buried in reports. The hum of computers and muted conversations filled the background. Then a knock. "Sir," said a young analyst stepping in, holding an iPad. "You should see this." Malcolm didn't look up at first. Later. "I'm in the middle of, sir," the analyst interrupted softly. "You need to see this one." There was something in his tone, that uneasy mix of fear and sympathy. Malcolm sighed and took the tablet. The video started mid-scene. A boy pinned to the ground. A white officer shouting. The crowd screaming for mercy. And then a close-up, the boy's face. Malcolm's breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer. It wasn't possible. That face, blood on the cheek, eyes wide with terror, was one he'd known every day for 16 years. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Jaden." The analyst hesitated. "It's been trending for the last 15 minutes, sir. Location tag says Brookdale Mall." For a second, the world went still. Then Malcolm stood up, slow, mechanical, like someone trying to contain an explosion inside his chest. His hand gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned white. He looked at the screen again, at the officer pressing his knee into his son's back, and something inside him broke. He hit the intercom. "Get me the operations room, now." 30 seconds later, Malcolm stormed into a briefing chamber filled with screens and agents. "Track my son's phone," he ordered. The room froze. No one spoke. One tech analyst blinked. "Sir, your son." "Yes." "My son. Jaden Carter. 16. He's at Brookdale Mall. I want his exact coordinates in 5 seconds." Fingers flew across keyboards. Within moments, a map appeared on the main screen, a blinking dot near the east parking lot. Malcolm's jaw clenched. His voice dropped low, every word cutting through the air. "We move. 10 agents. Quiet approach. No sirens. No one questioned him." You didn't question Malcolm Carter when his voice sounded like that. Back at the mall, chaos still simmered around the patrol car. Officer Dean Miller stood beside it, bragging into his radio. "Suspect detained, sir. Possible theft suspect. Matching description. All under control." His partner, Kevin Cho, hovered near the crowd, eyes darting nervously. Emily stood across the lot, clutching her iPad, still streaming live. Jaden sat, slumped in the back seat of the patrol car, cuffed, bruised, and silent. Then a sound. Low at first, then growing louder. Engines. 10 black SUVs turned the corner tires, screeching in unison. They came fast, organized, no markings, no sirens, just presence. People turned their heads. Some stepped back instinctively. The vehicles spread out, forming a perimeter around the scene. Doors opened. 10 men and women in dark jackets stepped out, the golden letters, FBI, glowing against the black fabric. They didn't shout. They didn't hesitate. They moved with precision, silent, deliberate, trained. The crowd gasped. Phones came up again. "Holy hell," someone whispered. "That's the FBI." Dean's smirk faded. "What the?" he muttered, scanning the perimeter. He took one step back, hand twitching toward his gun, but stopped. Something about their faces, calm, stern, commanding, told him this wasn't a coincidence. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth, whispering, "Oh my God." Then one of the agents raised his voice sharp, echoing across the lot. "Step away from the boy." Dean froze. The words sliced through the tension like thunder. People gasped, eyes wide. Kevin looked at the agents, then at Dean. "Sir, I think we need to stand down." Dean's voice cracked. Who the hell do you think another agent raised a badge? Federal Bureau of Investigation. Step away now. Dean's hand hovered near his holster, indecisive, his arrogance beginning to crumble under the weight of 10 steady gazes. The sunlight caught the gold of their badges, glinting like judgment. Dean's face drained of color. He lifted his hands, palms out, stepping back slowly. Inside the patrol car, Jaden blinked against the bright light reflecting off one of the agent's windshields. Through the glass, he caught the letters bold and clear, FBI. For a split second, hope flickered in his eyes. The crowd fell silent. Every whisper, every phone, every heartbeat seemed to stop at once. Even the air felt heavier, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Dean looked around, sweat beading on his temple. "What's going on?" he stammered. "Who called you people?" The agent didn't answer. He just motioned to his team spreading out around the patrol car. Their movements were smooth, coordinated, too practiced to be random. And then through the stillness, a new sound cut through the slow slam of a car door behind the line of black SUVs. Every agent straightened instantly. The crowd turned. From the farthest vehicle, a man in a dark suit stepped out. Tall, composed, silent. He adjusted his cufflinks, his expression unreadable. Dean's mouth went dry. The man started walking toward them, each step measured heavy with authority. And in that moment, before anyone spoke his name, the tension broke into realization. The air itself seemed to whisper it. Director Malcolm Carter, the father of the boy on the ground? No one moved. No one even breathed. Dean's lips parted, but no words came out. The color drained from his face completely as his own reflection stared back at him in the cold, unblinking eyes of the man he'd just wronged beyond measure. And for the first time that day, the officer who thought he had all the power stood perfectly still, froze. The ride to the station was silent, no shouting now, no sirens. Just the hum of the engine and the quiet rattle of metal cuffs against the seat. Outside, the world was already on fire. But inside, that patrol car, time moved painfully slow. Jaden stared through the window, his reflection flickering in the lights. His wrists throbbed where the cuffs had dug deep. He wasn't crying anymore. He'd crossed that point hours ago now. There was only confusion and disbelief. At the precinct, Officer Dean Miller shoved the door open, guiding Jaden inside like another name on a list. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold and merciless. The air smelled like coffee that had died in the pot and the sharp tang of metal. Dean smirked. "Let's see if your daddy's money can save you from this one." Jaden tried to steady his voice. "Please just call my parents." "I have the right." Dean cut him off, voice dripping with mock authority. "You've got the right to stay silent, so use it." He shoved Jaden into a metal chair. The cuffs clanked against the table, a cruel reminder of how powerless he'd become. Across the hall, Officer Kevin Cho stopped mid-step. He could hear everything through the thin wall, the mockery, the silence that followed. His hands tightened into fists. He wanted to speak up. He wanted to do what was right. But he didn't. Not yet. Inside the surveillance room, Sergeant Frank Diaz replayed the footage from the mall. He hit pause. On the screen, Dean's knee was pressed against the boy's back, Jaden's face frozen in pain and fear. Diaz leaned forward, his voice heavy. "This looks bad." A younger officer behind him muttered, "It's worse than bad, sir. It's viral. Already on Twitter, 500,000 views." Diaz's eyes narrowed. 500K climbing every second. Diaz exhaled slowly. This just became a storm. Another officer whispered, "Someone's losing their badge tonight." No one disagreed. Back in the holding room, Jaden sat under the flickering light. The shadows pulsed on the wall like they were breathing. He could hear laughter in the hallway, the sound of phones ringing, the normal rhythm of a place that felt anything but normal. He stared at his hands, red bruised, trembling. A quiet thought slipped out before he could stop it. For the first time, I wonder if justice ever meant anything. The door creaked open. Dean walked in, coffee cup in hand. "Thirsty?" he asked, smirking before taking a slow sip. "You know, kids like you always think the rules don't apply. Always somebody's special project." Jaden didn't respond. He just stared at the wall. Dean stepped closer, voice low and mean. "Look at me when I talk to you." Jaden raised his eyes, steady but tired. "I didn't do anything. You know that." Dean hesitated for half a second, then forced a smile. "Tell it to the judge." He turned and walked out the door, slamming behind him like a gunshot. In the main office, tension hummed through the walls. Phones rang nonstop. Reporters were calling. Screens flashed with headlines and hashtags number "Justice for Jaden," 2.1 million views. Number FBI investigation. Developing. Diaz stood pacing. He knew trouble when he smelled it, and this one reeked of it. "Where's Miller?" he demanded. "Interrogation room B," someone answered. Diaz took a breath that didn't calm him. "All right. Lock it down. Nobody leaves this building without clearance." Before he could say more, the ground itself seemed to vibrate. A low rumble rolled through the windows, deep, powerful. Everyone went still. Outside, the parking lot filled with shadows. 10 black SUVs glided into formation, engines purring like thunder held on a leash. They parked without a sound. The glass doors reflected the gold letters printed across dark jackets, FBI. One by one, the agents stepped out. Boots hit pavement in perfect rhythm. No shouting, no chaos. Just authority, cold and absolute. Inside, a rookie at the front desk whispered, Sarge, you might want to come see this." Diaz moved to the window, his heart sinking before he even looked. The agents were forming a perimeter, their movements sharp, efficient. At the center of them stood one man, tall, calm, silent. Director Malcolm Carter. Diaz's mouth went dry. He turned to his officers. "Everybody stay put. Don't make a move." Outside, Malcolm began walking toward the entrance. The reflection of red-hot headlines flickered across the glass doors: "Justice, Racism, FBI Response." His face was unreadable, but his eyes carried the kind of quiet fury that freezes a room. Inside, Jaden sat in the holding cell, unaware of the storm that was now standing outside the station's doors. He took a shallow breath, whispering to himself, "Dad, please find me." And right then, the low hum of engines faded. Silence settled, heavy, deliberate, because justice had just arrived. The glass doors burst open. The air inside the precinct turned to ice as Agent Laura Simmons stepped in, badge raised. 10 agents followed in formation behind her, black jackets marked FBI gleaming under the harsh lights. Her voice cut through the hum of phones and chatter. "We're here for Jaden Carter." Every head turned. Officer Dean Miller leaned back in his chair, a half smirk tugging at his mouth. "For a shoplifter," he said. "You've got to be kidding me." Simmons didn't blink. Her tone was pure steel. "For a victim of your abuse of power." The room fell silent. Even the humming fluorescent lights seemed to hesitate. And then another sound echoed from the doorway, slow, deliberate footsteps. A tall man in a dark suit crossed the threshold. No words, no introduction. But the weight of his presence made the entire squad room stand straighter. The badge clipped to his belt caught the light. Malcolm Carter. The same man Dean had seen on the news. The same man now looking straight at him and through him. Dean swallowed, hard, voice cracking. "Sir." Malcolm didn't answer. He walked past every frozen face, past Simmons, straight toward the interrogation room. Inside, Jaden sat alone, head bowed, still cuffed to the metal table. The door opened and the boy looked up. Dad. Malcolm stopped in the doorway. For a moment, the tough facade cracked. He knelt beside his son, unlocked the cuffs himself, and pulled him close. "You're safe now," he whispered. Then he stood. The room seemed smaller when he faced Dean. His voice was calm, the kind of calm that made people tremble. "You tackled a child. My child." Dean's lips parted, but no sound came out. Every officer in the room went silent. You could hear a pen drop. Kevin Cho looked down at the floor, shame rising in his throat. Simmons stepped forward. "Officer Dean Miller," she said formally, "you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Hand over your badge and weapon." Dean's hands shook as he unclipped the badge from his chest. The sound of it hitting the desk was deafening. Then came the pistol, laid down slowly like a confession. Simmons nodded to one of her agents. "Take him into custody for questioning." Dean started to protest, but the words tangled in his throat. He looked around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to defend him. No one moved. Diaz lowered his head. Kevin Cho took a step back. The silence was the verdict. Malcolm turned to his agents. "Get my son checked out. Now." 2 agents guided Jaden gently toward the hallway, wrapping a gray FBI jacket around his shoulders. The boy glanced back at his father, a single look that said everything. Trust, relief, fear, still fading. When the door closed behind him, Malcolm faced the officers again. "This," he said quietly, "is what happens when arrogance thinks it wears authority." He stepped closer to Dean, who stood rigid between 2 agents. "Justice doesn't need permission to walk in. It just does." Dean tried to speak, some mix of apology and excuse, but Malcolm raised a hand. "Save it. You had a badge. You forgot the weight that comes with it." He turned toward Sergeant Diaz. I'll expect full cooperation. Every report, every recording, every officer present. Diaz nodded quickly. Yes, sir. He wasn't sure whether he was more afraid of losing his job or disappointing the man standing before him. Through the windows, flashing lights from outside painted the walls in pulses of red and blue. The crowd had gathered again, reporters, neighbors, strangers, all holding up phones. The story that started in the mall was now unfolding on live television. Inside, Malcolm adjusted his cuffs, his face unreadable. Agent Simmons handed him a tablet. Sir, the media is asking for a statement. Malcolm looked toward the cell where his son had been sitting minutes earlier. Not yet, he said. Let the truth speak first. He walked toward the exit. Each step echoed like a drumbeat through the stunned precinct. Every officer he passed lowered their eyes. At the door, Malcolm paused. He looked back once, not at Dean, but at the entire room. Power, he said, his voice steady, means nothing if it forgets mercy. Then he left. Outside, the night air was cool and heavy. Reporters shouted, questions, cameras flashed, but the agents formed a protective wall around the father and son. Jaden leaned against his dad, still shaken, still quiet. Simmons opened the car door. Sir, we'll take him straight to the Bureau Infirmary. Malcolm nodded but kept his gaze on the station behind them. He said softly, almost to himself, they thought he was powerless. They forgot who's watching. The door closed. Engines started. The fleet of black SUVs rolled out together, cutting through the flashing lights and noise. And for the first time since the day began, the world outside the precinct felt still. Justice had moved, and nothing inside that building would ever be the same again. The conference room inside Brookdale Precinct was silent. No one spoke, no one moved. Only the low hum of the projector filled the air. On the wall, the video from the mall played in brutal clarity. Every shout, every plea, every second that had already circled the internet 1,000,000 times. The footage showed Dean's knee pressed into Jaden's back, the boy gasping for air, the crowd watching frozen in their own fear. When the clip ended, director Malcolm Carter didn't look away. He just let the silence hang there heavy enough to make the air burn. Then with a quiet fury, he spoke. 40 phones recorded this, he said. Not one person helped. His eyes swept the room, officers, witnesses, everyone who'd stood by. This is what happens when fear wins, when silence becomes a shield for injustice. Dean swallowed, voice trembling. He matched the suspect's description. Malcolm's gaze snapped to him. Match the suspect, he repeated, voice rising. He took a slow step forward. Black teen, dark hoodie, backpack. That's not a description, Officer Miller. That's your bias wrapped in authority. Dean's mouth opened, then closed again. The room felt smaller by the second. A knock broke the tension. The door opened and Emily Ward stepped in. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes, they were steady. She carried a tablet close to her chest. Sir, she said, her voice soft but clear. I sold him that hoodie. I've got the receipt, timestamp, and store footage. She set the tablet on the table, pressing play. The video showed Jaden smiling, paying for the sweater, thanking her before leaving. Then the mall alarm blared in the distance from an entirely different store. Malcolm nodded slowly. Thank you, Miss Ward. You did more than most. Emily's lip quivered. I wish I'd done it sooner. Malcolm's tone softened. Doing the right thing late is still better than never doing it at all. From the corner, Kevin Cho stepped forward. He looked pale, ashamed, but determined. Sir, I saw it too, he admitted quietly, and I said nothing. His voice cracked on the last word. I was afraid of losing my job, but I was wrong. Completely wrong. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Malcolm nodded once. Then you'll help fix it. Cho blinked. Sir, you'll assist the internal review, Malcolm said. You'll help rebuild what you watch crumble. Starting today. Kevin straightened his voice, trembling but resolute. Yes, sir, I will. Dean sat at the far end of the table, his hands trembling. His badge was gone, his eyes red. He looked older now, not by years, but by the weight of what he'd done. I thought, he began, voice breaking, I thought I was protecting the law. Malcolm looked at him, not with anger now, but with something deeper. Disappointment. You weren't protecting the law, Dean, he said. You were protecting your fear. And fear doesn't belong in a uniform. Dean's shoulders collapsed under the truth. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had pinned a boy to the ground. For the first time, they looked foreign to him, like they belonged to someone else. The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the hum of the lights seemed distant now. Emily stood near the wall, clutching her tablet. Kevin stared at the floor. And for a long time, Malcolm just stood there watching all of them, the officers who had stood by the citizens who had looked away. Finally, he said, "This room represents a crossroads. You can stay silent or you can stand up, but you can't do both." His voice deepened, each word landing like a hammer. Because silence didn't protect Jaden. It protected the people who heard him. No one dared to speak. Even Dean, who'd always filled rooms with noise, sat motionless, face buried in his hands. Malcolm turned off the projector. The screen went black, but the images burned in everyone's mind. He looked around one last time. "I'm not here to destroy careers," he said. "I'm here to rebuild integrity." His gaze found Dean again. "You made a choice out of fear. But now you get to make another one. A better one. You can help us change this system, or you can let your shame define you." Dean's eyes glistened. He nodded slowly, tears slipping down his face. "I want to change," he whispered. "I can't undo what I did, but I can face it." Malcolm nodded once, firm and final. "Then start by listening. Listening to the people you failed to see." The room stayed quiet for a long time. The walls held every word, every confession, every ounce of guilt. Emily closed her tablet, tears streaming freely now. Kevin exhaled shakily, finally meeting Malcolm's eyes. Dean stared at the blank screen ahead, the one that had just reflected his worst moment. Malcolm reached for the remote, his voice low but steady. "This isn't the end," he said. "This is the reckoning, the part where you decide who you really are." And as he walked toward the door, no one moved to stop him. They just sat there in the quiet weight of truth, realizing that justice wasn't only about punishment, it was about awakening. Morning light spilled through the tall glass windows of the Brookdale Police Department. The air, once thick with tension, now carried a quieter kind of weight, the weight of change trying to take root. Director Malcolm Carter stood at the front of the conference room. The same room that once echoed with excuses and silence was now filled with officers, community leaders, and press cameras. But this time, there was no denial. Only accountability. He rested his hands on the table, his voice calm but commanding. "From this day forward," he said, "we rebuild not with speeches but with systems." He clicked a remote and the first slide appeared on the screen behind him. "Mandatory implicit bias training, every officer, every quarter." "This isn't a seminar," Malcolm continued. "It's survival training for the conscience. If you can carry a gun, you can carry awareness." A second slide appeared. "Community oversight boards, citizen-led, with full access to disciplinary records and real decision power. The people deserve a seat at the table," Malcolm said. "Not as guests, but as guardians." The third slide, "Body cams required with footage, automatically uploaded to a public transparency database." He turned toward the officers seated before him. "Accountability is not the enemy of authority," he said. "It's what keeps it honest." No one argued this time. Even the older officers who'd once scoffed at reform sat silently, realizing the world outside was watching, and they could either evolve or vanish. Later that week, Dean Miller sat in a small classroom at the police academy. The man who once barked orders now stood before a group of new recruits, not as a cop, but as a cautionary tale. He looked different, no badge, no arrogance, just quiet remorse. He cleared his throat, voice unsteady. "I thought I understood what justice meant," he said. "But I confused control with safety, and power with purpose." The young recruits listened, uneasy but attentive. Dean glanced down, then forced himself to meet their eyes. "When I put my knee on that boy's back, I didn't just break protocol, I broke a promise. The promise every officer makes to protect, not punish." He paused. "You'll never forget the faces of those you hurt. I see his every night. Don't let that be your legacy." For a moment, no one moved. Then one trainee, barely older than Jaden, raised his hand. "Sir," he said softly, "did they forgive you?" Dean shook his head slowly. "Not yet. But I'm learning that forgiveness isn't given. It's earned one right action at a time." Meanwhile, Emily Ward stood on a small stage at the Brookdale Community Center. The room was packed: parents, students, neighbors, people who had watched the viral video that changed everything. She held the microphone with trembling hands, took a breath, and began. "The day I filmed, I was terrified," she said. "I didn't want to get involved. I thought someone else would step up." She looked out over the crowd, voice breaking slightly. "But silence helps no one. And I learned that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about caring enough to act anyway." The room fell silent, and then one by one, people began to clap. Slowly at first, then stronger. Among them was Officer Kevin Cho standing near the back. The applause washed over him like a promise he didn't deserve yet but wanted to live up to. A few days later, Malcolm called him into his office. "You spoke up when it mattered," Malcolm said. "Not in time to stop it, but in time to change what comes next." Kevin nodded, unsure what to say. Malcolm handed him a file. "You'll lead the Community Oversight Board. You'll report directly to me." Kevin froze. "Sir." "Me," Malcolm smiled faintly. "You saw wrong and admitted it. That's leadership. Don't waste it." Kevin swallowed hard. "I won't, sir." That night, Malcolm sat with Jaden on the back porch of their home. The sun was setting the kind of golden light that makes everything look gentler than it feels. Jaden stared at the horizon. "I don't want revenge, Dad." Malcolm turned slightly. "No, I just want change," Jaden said quietly. "Real change. So no one else has to go through what I did." Malcolm exhaled, his face softening. He looked at his son, not as an agent, not as a director, but as a father who had almost lost the one thing he couldn't replace. "Then that's what we'll make," he said. "Not for you, son, for everyone." The next morning, as news outlets reported, the sweeping reforms, the training, the oversight board, the transparency laws, people across the state began to talk. Some doubted it would last. Others felt hope for the first time in years. But one thing was clear: what started as a moment of cruelty had become a movement of conscience. And in the center of it stood a father, a son, and a promise that justice wasn't just something to be demanded, it was something to be rebuilt. 2 weeks later, the Brookdale Community Hall was filled to the brim. Every seat taken. People lined up against the walls, standing shoulder to shoulder. Police officers, teachers, parents, students, pastors, reporters, all gathered for one reason: to see what would come after the storm. The banner behind the stage read, "From Pain to Power, a Town's Commitment to Change." The air buzzed with quiet anticipation. Cameras were rolling, but for once it didn't feel like a show. It felt like something real was about to happen. At the front row sat Malcolm Carter, his son Jaden, Emily Ward, Dean Miller, and Officer Kevin Cho. It was an unlikely lineup, people who weeks earlier had stood on opposite sides of tragedy. Now they sat side by side. The mayor stepped to the podium first, welcoming the crowd. Then she turned and gestured toward Malcolm. "Director Carter, would you begin?" Malcolm stood slowly, buttoning his dark suit jacket. The room quieted. You could almost hear the sound of phones lowering, people choosing to listen instead of record. He looked out over the sea of faces and said, "2 weeks ago, I watched my son being treated like a criminal, not because of what he did, but because of what he looked like." His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the kind of weight that silence can't hide. He paused, letting that truth hang heavy in the room. "Justice," he continued, "should never depend on who your father is. It should depend on who we are as people, as a community, as a nation." A quiet murmur rippled through the audience, the sound of hearts breaking and healing at the same time. Malcolm nodded once, then stepped aside. "I think someone else has something more important to say." Dean Miller rose next. The man who once barked orders and carried arrogance like armor now walked to the microphone with his head slightly bowed. He adjusted it awkwardly, cleared his throat, and began. "When I put that boy on the ground," he said, voice rough with shame, "I told myself I was protecting the law, but I was wrong." He took a shaky breath, eyes glistening under the harsh lights. "That day, Jaden taught me what courage looks like, not by fighting back, but by enduring something no one should have to endure." The crowd was utterly silent. Dean swallowed hard. "I can't erase what I did, but I can make sure every new officer I train understands what it cost." He stepped back, and for a moment no one clapped, not because they didn't respect him, but because they were absorbing the weight of a man facing himself. Then one single pair of hands began to clap. It was Jaden's. And soon the entire hall followed. Emily Ward was next. She stood small but steady, her voice trembling at first, then growing stronger with every word. "The day I filmed that video," she said, "I was terrified. My hands were shaking. I wanted to walk away." She looked at the audience, her gaze finding the young faces in the crowd. But silence helps no one. If you see wrong, don't freeze. Don't look away. Don't think someone else will do it for you. Speak. Act. Her words hung in the air like a quiet anthem. And somewhere in the back, a woman whispered, "God bless her." Then came Officer Kevin Cho, standing tall in his crisp uniform, now the head of the Community Oversight Board. He looked directly at the officers seated near the back. "I saw it happen," he admitted, "and I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place. But silence makes you part of the problem." He exhaled, his tone turning firm. "We've started something new here. The board will hold every officer accountable, including me. Because justice can't exist without transparency. People nodded, murmured, clapped. It wasn't the sound of approval, it was the sound of belief, tentative but real. Finally, the mayor called Jaden's name. The crowd erupted with applause before he even reached the podium. The boy who had once been tackled to the ground now walked with quiet confidence, the lights catching the faint scar on his cheek, a reminder not of pain, but of survival. He stepped to the microphone, took a breath, and said, "Only 5 words, I was just buying a gift." That was it. No long speech, no theatrics. The words hit harder than any speech could have. For a long second, no one moved. Then the entire hall stood, hundreds rising to their feet, clapping, cheering, some crying openly. Emily wiped her tears. Dean looked down, then up, clapping through the ache in his chest. Kevin smiled faintly, nodding toward Jaden. And Malcolm, he didn't clap. He just watched his son, eyes full of pride and peace. The camera panned slowly across the crowd, faces of every color, every age. Black, white, brown, blue, uniform civilian clothes, all standing together under the same roof. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't the end. But it was a start. And in that moment, it didn't feel like just a community meeting. It felt like the beginning of something that might actually last. Because sometimes change doesn't begin with a speech or a policy. Sometimes it begins with a simple truth spoken in a trembling voice. I was just buying a gift. And from that pain came power. 3 months later, the world had moved on, or at least that's what it looked like on the surface. But for those who lived through it, the memory still breathed quietly beneath everything. At Stanford University, a soft California sun spilled through the dorm window of room 214. Jaden Carter stood there, suitcase open, unpacking the last piece of his past, a folded gray hoodie. The same one he had once bought for his sister's birthday. The same one that changed his life. He brushed the fabric with his hand, then hung it carefully inside the closet. No ceremony, no bitterness, just a quiet acknowledgement of how far he'd come. His phone buzzed on the desk. Dad calling. He smiled before answering. "Hey, Dad." Malcolm's voice came warm, steady, proud. "You doing okay, son? Better, Dad," Jaden said, glancing out the window at the sprawling campus. "Thank you." There was a pause, not awkward, just full of meaning. Then Malcolm said softly, "Don't thank me, Jaden. Just keep walking forward. That's how you win." The call ended. Jaden stared at the phone a moment longer, then exhaled as if letting go of the last shadow of that day. Somewhere across the city, Dean Miller stood before a classroom full of fresh recruits at the police academy. The walls were lined with posters about ethics, accountability, and public trust, words that meant little until you've broken them. He paced slowly, hands behind his back. "When I was in your seat," he began, "I thought compassion made you weak. I thought strength meant control." He stopped, turned, looked each young face in the eye. "The day you forget compassion," he said quietly, "you don't deserve that badge." The recruits sat in absolute silence. One of them raised a hand. "Sir, do you still believe in justice?" Dean smiled faintly. "Now more than ever. Because I learned it the hardest way, by seeing what happens when it's missing." He took off his hat, placed it on the desk, and let the truth settle in the room like a confession, finally finding peace. A few blocks away, Emily Ward stood beside Officer Kevin Cho at a community workshop titled "Seeing Beyond Skin." The hall was filled with police, students, and families. Kevin began, "We're not here to talk about race. We're here to talk about humanity, the one thing we all forget when fear takes over." Emily followed, holding the microphone with calm conviction. "The day I filmed that video, I was scared. But if I hadn't pressed record, we wouldn't be here today." She smiled gently. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it shakes, cries, and still chooses to do the right thing. The crowd applauded softly, not loud but long. It wasn't just appreciation, it was gratitude. Meanwhile, back home, Sophie Carter sat at the kitchen table surrounded by family and friends. Balloons hovered above her head, "Happy 13th, Sophie," written in glittery letters. She tore open a gift box and gasped. Inside was a brand new blue hoodie, the same color her brother had tried to buy for her months ago. Her mother smiled. "Your brother picked it himself." Sophie held it close, her eyes shimmering. "He came home safe," she whispered. Across the room, a photo hung on the wall. Jaden in his Stanford sweatshirt, smiling, the faint scar on his cheek barely visible. The caption below read, "Strength isn't silence. It's standing up when it hurts." Then came the voiceover, Jaden's voice, calm and sure. "That day, when they surrounded the truth, justice finally took its stand. I used to think strength was about fighting back, but sometimes it's about staying still long enough for the truth to be seen. As he spoke, the scene shifted slow-motion images bathed in golden light. 10 FBI agents walking across the courthouse, steps their badges glinting, like symbols of accountability reborn. Behind them, the American flag waved in the evening glow, and the reflection of the sun turned the marble floors into rivers of light. The camera lingered on Malcolm and Jaden, standing side by side, watching quietly. No words, just understanding the kind only earned through pain and purpose. The screen began to fade to black, but Jaden's voice continued soft, reflective. I didn't ask to be part of a movement. I just wanted to buy a gift. But sometimes the smallest act exposes the biggest truth. And when that truth finally stands tall, no force can bring it back down. The final shot froze on the image of the gray hoodie hanging in his dorm closet, the quiet symbol of everything that had changed. Text appeared on screen, white against the black background. One act of prejudice exposed 10 acts of courage. Then below it, another line, justice shouldn't depend on luck, it should depend on us. And as the music swelled, soft piano fading into silence, the message lingered like a heartbeat. Justice isn't an institution. It's a choice. One we have to keep making every single day. Thank you for watching this story from Mr. Max Stories. What happened to Jaden reminds us that justice isn't just a word, it's a responsibility. It's about courage, compassion, and the simple truth that standing up for what's right can change more than one life. If this story moved, you take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe in stories that inspire hope, empathy, and equality, subscribe to Mr. Max Stories to stay with us on this journey. Your support gives our team the strength to keep creating meaningful stories. Stories that open hearts, challenge minds, and remind us all of the power of doing what's right. This is Mr. Max Stories, where every story stands for truth, justice, and humanity.